Hello, I'm Steph from iDriver Classic, and today I'm showing you a car that was only ever made in America and Canada. We never got it in the UK, and yet over 3 million of them were made. It is the Ford Pinto. Now this example is from 1971, so right at the beginning of that Ford Pinto era. Now I know that this is a car surrounded in controversy, and we will talk about that in this video, and we'll put some cold hard facts to those stories, and we'll find out just why people were still so hooked into these, even after all the horror stories had gone out in the media. So without further delay, we're going to have a look at Ford's first subcompact and America's first car with rack and pinion steering. It is the Ford Pinto.
The story starts on a high note for the Ford Pinto as it comes into just the right world, a world where people are watching the petrol a little more keenly with the OPEC oil embargo and the gas crisis. The car was a win for Ford because they'd been eyeing up the success of the VW Beetle with some growing concern. And every manufacturer was also doing the same thing, and they all responded in different ways. And Chrysler even went as far as to import cars from overseas manufacturers that would fit the bill. I think they looked into stuff from Hillman and Mitsubishi, but everyone was reacting differently. And Ford, well, they couldn't quite agree at first what they were going to do, because Ford's president was keen to keep chasing that larger, pricier model. And the VP of the North American operations team said that now was the time for a subcompact to sit within Ford's range, which when you look at what they were doing with the Vega, it kind of makes sense because that comes out in 1970. Anyway, the race to get it to market was a swift one, and this meant cutting corners in a way that really you would never get away with today. And actually, that's a good thing, because listen, the crash testing and the tooling, which should have been done one after the other, were done simultaneously. So what does that mean? Well, it means that when problems arose, the changes were not only difficult, but a much bigger cost than traditionally budgeted for. And that means that changes, unless they're absolutely necessary, just get pushed out the window. So then the car essentially comes to market without all the necessary testing done, which saves money in production, but as we all know, costs Ford much more dearly later on in both monetary and reputational value. And there's a lot of lessons that everybody learns from this entire thing. Now, at first, the car was riding high, and those aforementioned high sales meant that Mercury took it on, and then they rebadged it as the Bobcat. And sales were stellar. In fact, 800,000 units of all the overall sales, and remember, just over 3.1 million were sold, was shifted in the first 2 years. So everybody knew someone who owned one of these, or they definitely had seen one. It was starting to become such a staple car that you would see absolutely everywhere. And then there's a horrific accident, which is really what everybody remembers about the Ford Pinto, and it absolutely blots Ford's copybook, and it completely ruins the Pinto sales potential. Although that's not the most important thing, because people dying is what's important here. Now listen, if you don't know the story, I'll tell you. A Pinto driver was out in her car in the summer of 1972. The engine stalls, and then a Galaxy comes careering up behind the car, smashes into the rear of the Pinto, and it immediately bursts into flames. Now you might be asking why this happens. Well, sadly, it's a bit of a frustrating oversight. Well, I certainly think it is, because I think they probably could have avoided this if they'd followed their usual method of bringing a car to market. So what they've done was they put the fuel tank behind the rear axle of the car. So when it was shunted from behind, the fuel tank would be pushed into the rear axle with the bolts which protrude out, and then that punctures the tank. So what happens? Well, you lose fuel. And additionally, the fuel filler neck, which was placed in the rear quarter panel, had a propensity to tear out of the tank, which again means more fuel spillages. Now what would then happen would be the flammable fuel would and then could be ignited by any number of things. And that's not the only risk, or the first risk, because the rear end hadn't been designed to absorb the impact in accidents in the way that it really needed to. And most worryingly, a lot of these accidents then meant that the doors would warp and trap people inside the cars, which meant that people weren't able to escape if they were in these accidents. And it meant that buyers and potential buyers didn't want to buy them because they didn't want to be a sitting duck in the event of an accident. Now, I said at the start of this video we would talk fact. So if you've ever seen Pinto Madness, they estimate that there were at least 500 fatalities in Pintos and perhaps even a number shy of just under 1,000, when in actuality the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration investigated this thoroughly and they could only apportion 27 fatalities and 24 non-fatal injuries to these cars. However, I'm sure you'll agree with me that is still too many for a problem that could have been ironed out before a single wheel was turned on any national highway. And things do change because in 1977, laws are made and vehicles have to be able to withstand a 30-mile-per-hour rear end impact with no fuel lost. Ford changed the Pinto, so all the Pintos that come out from 77 onwards take this all into account. And what they then do is they then recall all the cars that are made from launch to 76, and they then apply changes to try and alleviate the problem. However, the damage was done for the poor Pinto because suddenly many just saw it as damaged goods, which in my opinion is such a shame for such a brilliant design and such a decent car overall. Now, the car did actually continue selling until 1980, and then in 1981 it was replaced by a car that is recognised across the world, the Ford Escort. Now let's hop inside and take a closer look at this car because I think it's brilliant.
Coming inside, there's so much room inside here. Now, if you want a good visual of how big this is, I think it's about 163 inches long and then 69.4 inches wide. Now, I've laid the metric over the top there for you if you're more of a metric person. I personally work in inches. When people tell me things are so many meters long, I think, I have no idea how big that is. Now, coming inside, one of the things I love about this is it has that great 70s pastiche that I love about 70s vehicles, where you've got the vinyl, you've got the fake wood trim, and actually it makes me feel a little bit homesick because the two gauges in front of me feel really reminiscent of that early Marina styling. But they always do say, oh, you know, the Marina has such an American style to it when you look inside the dash. Anyway, coming back to this car, because I have never ever seen one of these in person, and if like me you've never looked really much at American Auto, you might not have either. So everything is deliciously simple, which I love. So as we walk through, I'll show you some of the bits that are standard and some of the bits that are maybe not. So first of all, you've got your steering wheel and it's still got all the original fake wood capping. You've got that little centre detailing on it, and you've only got two dials in front of you. And so on the left you've got your fuel gauge, and then you'll see at the bottom you've got some warning lights there. So you've got one for engine, one for brakes and one for alternator. Over on the right hand side you've got your speedo. Now, I had a look, this has got the 2-litre Pinto engine in, and I didn't know how fast you could go in this because of course we're in speed camera world, aren't we, nowadays, so you can't ever test these things properly. It should do top speed apparently of 90 to 95, which would have been really good going. So again, it's a nice one because if you're keeping it standard, you'd be able to take it out on the motorway and cruise in it. And yeah, and that's probably something I should say as well, because you've probably been watching this video and you've thought, oh, that's a little bit rough around the edges. But here's the thing, it's not staying standard. This is its last weekend, and it's only its first weekend with Neve and Jake, and it's its last being standard because they're turning it into a race car. And I asked to take it out and show you because we've got so few of these in the UK that I wanted to experience it before it changed over into something more magnificent with its V8 engine. So I should probably say, actually, if you want a 2-litre Pinto engine, do drop me an email to idriveaclassic@gmail.com and I'll put you in touch with Neve and Jake because they're taking it out, and it seems a shame to waste an engine. So if you need one, get in touch with them and I'll link you in. Anyway, coming into the centre here, you've got all your temperature controls. Again, it's those like spindly controls that I always have a slight fear of touching because they always feel like they're going to break off in your hands. Coming over into this delightful Pinto styling across the top, you come down into your glove box, across to your ashtray. Now, I love this design because look, as it pops out, it's quite stiff because it's metal on metal, is you've got your ashtray below it, and above it, you've got your cigar lighter. Coming into the middle, you've got your radio. Now, this looks like it would have been original. And then we come down into these 3 gauges. Now these aren't original, and I just need to point that out for you. So you've got your ammeter, you've got your oil pressure, and you've got your water temperature, and those are so important, I always think, because those can be so helpful in taking you from a slight overheat into missing a head gasket failure, which is always more of a problem to sort. Over from there, you've got a modern, I think it'd probably be a CD player that's in there, it's missing the head on that. And then it is the 4-speed manual on this. I think the option on it, there was an auto option, and I think it was a 3-speed auto. I'm not sure what else the box is used in, but anyway, that is the setup inside here. Now I'm trying to think what else I need to show you. So over on the left here, we've got the lights and we've got the windscreen wipers. But as you can see, everything is marvellously well put together. Now it is a very simple car, but remember when they were designing it, so I was telling you earlier, they wanted it under that $2,000 mark. They wanted it under $2,000, and I think it came in at $1,991, and they also wanted it under £2,000 in weight, which explains why they kind of just lop that back end off and they're like, right, okay. And I think that's why you see those cuts. But also as well, when we talk about the race to cheap cars, that is a very 70s thing. You do see it a lot across many different brands, so it's certainly not a slight on Ford. They weren't the only brand doing it. Everyone was doing it. Everyone was racing to get these cars out because it was becoming, of course, a more crowded market. You had, you know, these cars coming in from abroad. When we look at the cars that this was coming up against, cars like the Toyota Corona, the VW Beetle, these were relatively new problems for American manufacturers, because typically they would have come up against other American manufacturers. So like you've got the Chevrolet Vega, so that would have been another competitor. And yes, you know, 20 years prior, Ford might have said, oh, you know, we're coming up against Chevrolet, that's expected. But these were European, Japanese brands that were coming in. So really everyone was galloping to that finish line. So when they were designing this, Ford had typically spent around 43 months developing cars, and for this they spent just over 2 years. So when we talk about the shortcomings, you know, they were operating in a very different world to where they'd been even 5-10 years prior. And I think that is so important to talk about. And it's also important, I think, in today's world when so many things are so negative and people talk about car design and say, oh, it's all the same and all the rest of it. We are very fortunate to live in a time when we have that choice, where you can drive a car where safety features are a lot more advanced and things like that. I mean, there are a lot of negatives living in 2025, but one of the positives is that we do have that choice. You can drive something old like this, or you can drive something modern where it's a lot more sanitised and a lot safer. Personally, I like to take a walk on the wild side. But anyway, I've chatted away to you about this Pinto. I think it's quite delightful. I thought when I first looked at pictures of it, it was going to be so much bigger inside and I was going to feel really intimidated to drive it. But actually, I'm quite enjoying the experience so far. So let me start it up. I should probably point out as well, it has got disc brakes on it. There were so many things that were optional extras. We were debating this earlier, whether the disc brakes were optional or not. Now, all the information that I'd read, they were optional, but Neve and Jake said we think that disc brakes were standard. So if you do know the answer to this, let me know. I would like to know. Another thing that was extra money was power steering, and this does not have it. But I've been reliably informed that even on the tightest of bends, I'm not going to miss it, but we'll see on today's test. Oh. What am I like? Why am I like this? Right, everyone's laughing in the car now because I left it in gear. This is because I'm so used to leaving cars in gear. Hold on. Oh, come on. Has got an auto choke on this. Should probably mention that. Hey, that sounds good. Should we have a listen from the back and then we'll go out on a drive? Right, let's go on an adventure. Part 2. We already filmed one and I just thought, this isn't to the calibre that I want for you all to see at home. Now look, I've got the absolute ultimate test drive experience here. I'm on roads that I don't know, in a left hooker, with a manual gear change, and you know what? I'm all right. So look, we've got 4 gears. I should probably say as well that it's synchro on all 4 gears, which has made it absolutely lovely. And you know what, actually, Neve and Jake said to me, oh, just be careful when you change gear, because it's a bit like a pudding stirrer, like you're not going to be able to find the gears rationally. Anyway, I've just cracked through that gearbox. I did it the first time and I did it the second and third and fourth, and I thought, actually, this is all right. I think it's because I'm so used to driving stuff that's a bit haphazard that nowadays my standards are, I would say, not low, but I'm definitely a lot more willing to put up with nonsense than perhaps someone who drives something a bit more modern. So for me, I don't think it's been difficult at all. Gear change is nice and easy. You can go through the box quite quickly. And as someone who worries a little bit before they test out an American vehicle, I have found this remarkably easy because you haven't got an enormous width on this. It's handling really well on British roads. Now, as I put my foot down, this is an excellent opportunity to tell you that it is very, very willing. It's easy to understand your road positioning as well, because you can see right to the end of the bonnet. You've got good visibility down on both sides because of the mirrors, and it picks up relatively quickly. Now, I'm sitting at 50 and I'm quite comfortable with that because I don't know these roads, I don't know the car, and I'm sitting on the opposite side of the car to what I'm used to. So I just want to be mindful of that as I drive along. And there's no one behind me, so I don't need to worry about it. Now, what can I tell you? Well, first of all, we have no power steering. And I was a little bit nervous about that when I got in. I thought, oh, is it going to be heavy? Is it going to be cumbersome? Not so. I mean, it's got quite a turning circle on the old girl, but the steering is remarkably light, so much lighter than I thought it would be. And as well as that, it is responsive as well. I'm very much used to rack and pinion steering, and for the American driver, it must have been quite a different experience because they've been used to steering boxes, and you do have a very different feel to those. You know, I've got a steering box in the Standard, for example, and it does feel noticeably different to coming into something with rack and pinion. Now, as well as that, I'll say that I feel like it feels quite compact, it feels quite light, quite sprightly. A lot of American stuff that you take out, oh, it feels delicious, it feels luxurious, but as it gently wafts along, it feels almost like you're navigating a boat. With this, because it's so much smaller and so much more compact, you get what I feel like feels like a more nippy experience. Now, I think Ford should have brought these out over here because I think they would have done well coming up against stuff like the Marina, for example. Can you imagine something like this? This looks mean. It looks like a car that you could feel quite dangerous in. It's a nice thing to drive, and I really, really like it. Now, I know that Ford was in that strange era where you've got like Ford of America, Ford of England, you've got Ford of Germany. You know, we haven't stepped into that Escort era where things start to become a lot more homogenised. But look, I love this, and I think it would have done well over here because even as we navigate these smaller British roads, you can see that you really don't have any troubles with it whatsoever. I think it's a lovely thing to drive. Now, my personal opinion is I think it's sad that Neve and Jake are turning this into a race car. I know it's their car to do what they want with, but as I jump in this, I think, oh, this would be great for like a road trip or to use as your daily driver. And the best thing about it is if you're watching this video and you're thinking, Steph, I totally agree with you, I would love one of those as a daily drive, you can get all the parts quite easily because that 2-litre Pinto is used in all sorts. It's not just used in these. And as well as that, you can get all the other parts you need very, very easily because, of course, with over 3 million made, although they've lost a lot of them to scrap heaps and to races and all the bits in between, they are still very well catered for. So if you fancied one of these as a daily drive, it would be something that you could do and you wouldn't have to put great swathes of money by. So if it's cheap to keep on the road and it's something that you could drive daily, what don't I like about it? But something I don't like about it is you have to keep giving it plenty of revs to keep it going. And it's a driving style that I don't usually follow by, so it feels a little bit alien to me, and I feel almost like a 100-year-old driver. You remember that program? If you haven't seen it, you should watch it on YouTube. It's very funny, where you've got all these old people furiously over revving the cars, and I feel like one of those. I don't feel like myself. So I guess that's one of the takeaways for me. The interior, whilst it is very comfortable indeed, and these seats are very, very comfy, the dash itself feels quite Spartan, and it feels like quite a cheap trim on it. So I think those are probably my only two takeaways that I don't like, and those are things that I could easily become accustomed to, because let's face it, there's a lot of cars from the 70s where trim does feel like it's the cheaper end of the market, where there are little quirks that you have to get used to. So all in all, I have really enjoyed driving this Pinto today. It's certainly not a car that was on my test list. It's not one that I was expected to take out, but I'll tell you what, I have thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you very much, Neve and Jake, for letting me take this car out. You let me know what you think in the comment section below. Would you daily drive one of these? Have you daily driven one? The chances are maybe. Let me know your stories in the comment section below. But until